Hey, welcome back everybody. As we press on through week 5, we're going to be looking at level 3 part C, which is adding our first C# script. So let's go look at what's in our folder. If you follow this link, you'll find the handout for today that will walk you through all of these steps, but I'm going to walk through most of it with you right now myself. The essential question today is, how does the use of scripts add to the functionality of games developed in Unity? Now, we actually already have some scripts in our game that are creating a lot of important functions for us, like the way that your water is animated uses a script, the way that your first-person character controller moves uses a lot of scripting. Difference today is we're going to be writing our own script to achieve something instead of using a script that was already created for us. So how do we go about adding our own code? Well, the very first thing we're going to do is create a folder to help us keep our code and our scripts organized. So let's jump back into Unity. With your assets folder selected, you can jump up here and click Create, or you can come over here and Control click and then hover on Create and select Folder. And I will simply call this Scripts. Right now there's not much to see here, so it's time to create our own script. In our handout, they ask us to name this script mouse click. So I'm going to Control click over here. Once again, hover on Create, and then go up and almost at Folder, but just below it is C# script. When I click on this, the script is created down here, and it's ready to be renamed. So if I don't click on anything before I start typing, I can call this, just as we do in the example, mouse click. So mine is mouse click, all one word, with a capital M in mouse and C in click. The capitalization doesn't matter that much, but the lack of a space is very important. If you put a space between mouse and click, it's actually going to break your code. So be sure whenever you name your scripts, don't put spaces in the name of the script. And this is a good time to get used to that idea of small things making a big difference. That's the nature of this style of coding. If you put a space where it doesn't belong, or a period or semicolon in the wrong spot, it could fundamentally break your code and keep it from doing what you want, or Unity could simply refuse to run your script and not even allow you to test play your game. But now, all you need to do to start editing your script is double-click on it. And that will open a program that we haven't used yet called MonoDevelop. MonoDevelop is where we will be writing and compiling our scripts. So this is what a brand new Unity script looks like. There's a few things already in place, and most of this we'll leave alone, but we're going to be adding on to what's already here. But before we start writing any new code, let's make sure we understand what's already here. Up at the very top, we don't need to worry about this using section too much. We won't be adjusting this very often. This is just simply setting up where our code is finding some of its information. The public class simply sets up the name of your script. So you'll notice that after public class it says mouse click, all one word, just the way that I typed in the name of my script. So these two will always match, or if they don't, this will actually break your code. Now here, whenever you see a / before a line, that means that line actually isn't counted as code. Lines like this are considered notes. So like a note from one programmer to another, or a note from a programmer to themselves so that they don't forget what they were using a certain line of code for. So for example, void start says use this for initialization. This means right when the game starts, any code that happens inside of this void is going to happen at that time. A void is just a type of function. Whereas in void update, this is called once per frame. Anything that's called once per frame means that it will happen in every frame of the game as it's being played. Keep in mind that most games run between 30 and 60 frames a second, so whatever happens here is usually checking to see if it should happen on every frame. Because for example, playing a sound effect 30 to 60 times a second probably isn't the way that you want it to actually function. But you may want to check 30 to 60 times a second whether or not that sound effect should be played. Now it's important to notice that right after mono behavior, we have a curly bracket. And if I click on this curly bracket, you'll notice another curly bracket highlights. This bracket down here becomes orange, because these two are connected. These two curly brackets are sort of like lids on a container. And if I were to take one of these lids off, the code would go kind of spilling out into nothingness, and it would really break everything, and my code wouldn't be able to function. You'll also see these same curly brackets after the beginning of each void. So we have void start, and then we end with a curly bracket and another one down here that it's attached to. So everything that happens in void start needs to be contained inside of these curly brackets, or it won't happen at this time and it may break the rest of our code. So whenever we have a void or a function of any kind, we need to contain the code that belongs there with the curly bracket on either side of it. Now as we move forward here, I'm going to be keeping my example code on the right and writing my own code over here on the left. So your handout will tell you that at this point, you should create a new void, a new function for onMouseDown. This is something that will happen when you click on your mouse, or in our case, our trackpads. And we're supposed to write this code just before the last curly bracket that's already in our script. So I'm going to click after the second to last curly bracket and hit enter a couple times to give myself some room to work down here. Next, I will start my new function by typing void onMouseDown. It's important that you type this exactly as you see it, because if you don't, you can guarantee something's going to break. For example, if you get to capitalize the O and N or the D and down, this isn't going to function the way you want it to. And a good habit that I've picked up is to create both curly brackets right at the beginning. So instead of creating one curly bracket and then typing my code, and a lot of times people then forget to close it, I just create two curly brackets at the beginning and make some space for myself to type inside of my container. So I'm building the box before I put anything inside of it, instead of building one wall of the box and then putting something close to it and trying to build the rest of the box around it. So now that I have my container here, I'm going to put the code inside. The code here is destroy GameObject. It's important to note that this line ends in a semicolon. This line here is an example of a statement. A statement is simply a line of code that does something. So you can think of a statement a lot like a sentence, and just like every sentence ends in a period, every statement must end in a semicolon. Now let's go back to our reference and see what comes next. Oh, and by the way, void onMouseDown, when we click, what's it going to do? It's going to destroy a GameObject. So what we're creating here is a piece of code that when we click on something, it will disappear. So think of this as a code that will help us with walking around our game world, and when we're exploring, we can click on objects to pick them up. Next, we need to create a new variable. Another thing that's going to happen to our objects before we destroy them is when we hover on them, they're going to glow a certain color. This will help the player understand that it's an interactive object that they can click on. So to create a new variable, we're going to go up very near the top of our script. And before void start, but inside of this curly bracket after our mono behavior, I'm going to click. In my example, I'm clicking on line 6 here. I'm going to hit enter a couple times to give myself some room to work. And then I'm going to type, just like in my example, public space renderer space rend, and end with a semicolon. So the renderer, or rendering, is when we're shown anything in our game world, whether it's terrain or an object, a wall or a tree. Those are all things being rendered. And by creating this public rendering variable, we're going to be able to change the color of the objects that we're rendering. Continuing down at our example, we are creating two more functions, so two more voids. And I'm going to add these to the very end, and when I say very end, I of course mean before my last curly bracket, because I can't put anything outside of this, or it will break my code. So now we're going to determine when to use this new public variable that's going to be adding color to our objects. So now we're going to determine when to show a color and what color we're going to show. So we use void onMouseEnter, and this is going to make something happen when the mouse enters the space of another object. And what will happen will go inside. And that's all we need for onMouseEnter. We're not going to get too in the weeds about what these numbers are for right now, but this will give you the color that you want. And now we'll tell it when to stop rendering that color, using this onMouseExit function. Notice again that all of my lines that are contained inside of onMouseEnter are statements that are ending in semicolons. Now we're almost done, and as we're looking at our example of our finished script, there's one more thing that we need to do, which is inside of the start function, which we already have. I simply need to tell it that when we start, it needs to get the component of the renderer. Double checking my work here that I haven't missed anything. And I'm fairly confident that I've gotten this all done and done right. So now it's time to save our script and go add it to an object. So making sure that I'm in MonoDevelop, I go up to File and simply Save, and this should update my code inside of Unity. Going back into Unity, if I have my mouse click script selected, it will be easy to tell if I've saved my work or not, because over on the right in the inspector, you should see an example of your code right here. Now let's create a game object just to test this on. Don't worry about making the real collectible object that you want right now, just test it. We're going to fail faster here. If it doesn't work, we want to know now, not after we've designed the perfect object. First, I'm just going to double click on my FPS controller to get me close to where my character spawns so that I can test this quickly and easily. Now, somewhere close by, I'll simply go Game Object, 3D Object, and Cube. Any object will work, but why not a cube? So here's my cube, and now, to attach my script, all I need to do is make sure that I have my cube selected, and since I have lots of cubes making up the walls, let me make this very clear that this is my collectible. I'll just name this Pickup Object. Then, I've got my Pickup Object selected, I can see its inspector over here. I want to click and hold on my mouse click script and drag it over into the inspector of the object that I want to be collectible. Now you can see our script still makes it seem as though something is missing. Because in our variable of rend, we wrote this. This is showing up because we've created that public variable of rend. It says none renderer. So it doesn't know where to render the colors. All we need to do is actually click on our pickup object in the hierarchy and drag it over to this slot and make sure that it understands that when we hover on this object, that this is the object that should glow with a new color. Now before we go test play, there's one more thing that we want to change. We want to go and click on our FPS controller, and then in our first person controller's inspector, we want to go look at the script for the first person controller, and we need to click this little arrow here to expand mouse look. Then, uncheck the lock cursor. With that unchecked, when we go into our game, we can look at the object, and when we hover our mouse on it, it becomes an object that we can pick up and collect, simply by clicking. Now you can apply this logic to any game object that you put into your world. So the cube isn't a very thrilling collectible, but if you already have a theme and an idea for your world, and you should by now, any objects that might be something that you need to collect, whether it's components to combine and create a medicine, or materials to use to build up your defenses, whatever you're going for in your game, think about what the player would be collecting, and put those objects in your world, apply this script, and then the player can go around and search for these objects and start collecting them. So you've done it. You've written your first C# script. Just be meticulous, take your time, and check your work. I guarantee that this will work if you pay attention and do everything just as we did in the example. Alright, good luck and get to it.